When I worked in IoT, I never believed that voice stuff would be real 5 years ago. And now I have an Alexa in almost every room of my house. There's not going to be any shortage of jobs for security professionals anytime ever. There's a lot of change going on in the industry right now. There's a lot of players in the market. There's a lot of tools. There's also almost a lot of noise just in the market itself. I think as a developer, it's a little confusing. One of the things we had to figure out was how to get the developers to care about this.
Hi, I'm Guy Pojarny, CEO and co-founder of Sneak, and you're listening to The Secure Developer, a podcast about security for developers, covering security tools and practices you can and should adopt into your development workflow. It is a part of the Secure Developer community. Check out thesecuredeveloper.com for great talks and content about developer security and to ask questions and share your knowledge. The Secure Developer is brought to you by Heavybit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining us again. And today we have Brian Sodano from Liberty Mutual. Welcome on the show, Brian. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me, Guy. Appreciate it.
So, Brian, we have a whole bunch of topics to cover. Before we dig in, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What is it that you do, and how did you even get involved in security in the first place?
So I've been in software development industry for about 20 years. Always been an engineer, still consider myself an engineer. Don't get to write a lot of code these days, but
still engineered hard.
I have my side project, so that keeps me busy. I've always found that security was actually a very important aspect of this. I've watched it evolve over a long period of time, from anything from physical security down to AppSec stuff. Always been part of the process from either, remember 20 years ago setting up servers and physical stuff and worrying about actual physical security, all the way down to now. I'd say I got very into this a few years ago. I worked at a small cybersecurity startup that was actually here in Boston.
Okay.
Got very involved with analyzing different vendors in the space, static security, pen testing, dynamic security, emerging runtime security market, looking at all of these different aspects. And I found it fascinating because there's so many different angles about this, and everyone has their different take on what's important and how stuff works. And there's some elements and essential stuff. So I came to Liberty Mutual about 2 years ago, and I've been looking at ways to improve that there while working on a digital transformation project as part of their platform, which I'd gladly talk more about too.
Yeah, for sure. So, you went through this great journey in your engineering, and I love that. And, I guess just as a side comment, you also have done maybe still run the local Nodejs meetup group here.
I did. In fact, that's where I first met you. Yeah. So about 5 years ago now.
Yeah, it's been a little while there, but I seem to recall you had a kind of a security interest then as well.
It was funny. Well, first of all, I'll never forget, you showed up and you kind of pinged me out of nowhere and said, hey, I'm going to be in town. I want to talk about this stuff. I'm like, I don't know what this is, but it's fine. Security had become a very popular thing. I remember two things from that meetup. One was I asked you, I said, is this like NSP, like Node Security Project? And your answer was, oh, no, this is way better than that.
Good to hear. I was confident even back then.
You were. And I said, okay. I said, you go talk because, we had, so basically, the Nodejs Meetup in Boston is this, monthly-ish meetup. Sorry, guys, if you're listening and your Node Meetup have been slacking a little bit, have been busy. But we have regular meetups. And I think that one was security themed, and you said you'd come in. And the second thing I remember, by the way, was you had the little roll-up magic wands. So those little plastic things that you roll up and then you kind of throw it up in the air and a magic wand appears.
Indeed.
My kids still have a bunch of them at home, believe it or not.
Yep.
We found some when we moved and they're still throwing them around, which is great.
They continue to be our, I like to say that if we've achieved nothing as a startup, we've perfected swag, with these magic wands.
You need more magic wands. You got to bring them back and keep doing them. So one of the things that I found very interesting about that, also as an aside, and this, by the way, this is not a plug on Sneak, I swear, the audience really resonated with what you were talking about at that meetup, right? And so you're talking about how Sneak works, how it's very developer friendly. I don't think it was so much that it was security software. I think it was the fact that you were actually talking to developers as a developer, showing them how to do this in the code and going through. And I think they were like, oh, okay, this is super easy. Like, this makes sense. I understand this. I can see where this is going to evolve. It's easy to put in my processes. And it really hit me, at that point. I was like, wow, I think like they're kind of onto something. And I kind of think about that over like the past few years as I've looked at other tooling and stuff like that too, because I think the entire security market, as I've looked at it over the past 3-4 years, is so tailored towards certain audiences and certain end games of what people are really looking for and what it is that they need to support as part of their stuff. But it was really the first point I saw somebody really seriously targeting the developer audience, right? So I took that, and I remember like I got tremendous feedback on that. Like, you need to have more like developer-oriented stuff. And actually, it's funny because we really talked to, and I started gearing towards other companies when they started coming in. Like, you really need to start talking about the APIs you offer, like the kinds of ways you can interact. So you did change my mentality a little bit about how to run that meetup, which was good. It was that great turnout, that great showcase, but I think it was that really like resonating with the developer that really kind of drove that stuff.
Well, that's awesome. First of all, awesome to sort of hear that that it left a good impression. And I do think, and I guess we kind of we get a chance to sort of maybe move this back in, which is, this whole theme of sort of developer and security has really strengthened, over those sort of years, since that talk way back when. So maybe let's dig into this one for you. So you're, you come into Liberty and you're not in a security title. You come in to do really a digital transformation project and change it. Tell us a little bit, paint a bit of that picture, what's the sort of scope of the initiative and how does security play a role in it?
So Liberty Mutual has, for the past 2 years, undergone what's commonly called like digital transformation, right? So folks not familiar with that, they were operating in a very waterfall software delivery model. They weren't necessarily following agile practices. A lot of things were tied to big, long delivery dates, project-based, had a lot of, analysts write up a lot of papers, make these project plans, deliver stuff. It was slow, right? It was essentially, in order to deliver into functionality, it was a very difficult transition to be able to actually get stuff out the door and move stuff in. So they moved to agile methodology. They moved towards a very developer-centric model, and they shifted the way in which they work, right? So we're very similar to like a Spotify model. You have product owners, we have development squads. Their task is now to maximize customer delivery and impact, right, as we go, right? So everything is customer-centric, everything is customer-focused, and the teams are consistently looking to deliver the right kind of value outward. And one of the reasons why they're doing this is in this industry, they're looking for essential operational efficiencies to be able to drive more adoption of folks to be able to buy insurance online, right? We are historically a very successful business for getting folks to come in and work through agents and partners and call centers and reps, but sooner or later, right, the customer demand, I can think of younger folks and millennials that don't even want to talk to people on the phone.
You want to go online somewhere, right?
Correct, yeah. I mean, and you look at what insurtechs are doing, you look at other startups in the space and fintechs. I mean, they're gearing everything towards online. They don't have the giant distribution network that we have going for us. So they're making a shift for the benefit to that. So as we do that and as we start to drive through, you look at these different teams that are building that. We have a bunch of teams that are working down here in Boston and up in New Hampshire, Seattle, Ireland, and they're looking at ways in which to engage the customer faster. Now, what's funny is typically most people wouldn't think to engage with an insurance company very often, right? I mean, how often are you going to go do this? So the name of the game is speed to attract them in from a sales point of sale perspective, right? Being able to draw them in. Now, of course,
capture some attention.
Correct. And of course, price matters with this, and there's other factors that go into that. But once you do that, there's also a speed factor and a convenience in I have to deal with my insurance company, right? So I have to make payments. I have to file claims. I want to have payout on what it is that you said you're covering. And so in order to transform those particular experiences, we're developing software super quickly and trying to see essentially kind of in an agile way, like what sticks. Like we're constantly testing and measuring. We're constantly throwing stuff out there. As you can imagine, a lot of this means that stuff is changing all the time. Right? Right. So when you start getting in that environment, and we also embrace an open source mentality, we move from a lot of primarily Java proprietary stacks into JavaScript, open source, community, full stack type of
full. Sounds like a wholesale change there.
It was a very wholesale change, but as we made that change, now you're opening up a nice broad ecosystem, which on one hand is great because you have all access to all these commonly used libraries, and you can not reinvent the wheel every single time. Con is that there could be potential vulnerabilities that are opened up in these particular libraries, as well as new methodologies in which we're deploying software while we're throwing it out into the cloud. And different mixed methodologies of hybrid environment as we move into a new way of working.
Right.
So what's been interesting and what's been a continuously evolving way in which we've operated is the best way I could say this, is when you have the market teams and the digital group that we're part of continuously pushing out these changes, and they're constantly churning through, and you don't have these big project plans, you don't have these big things anymore that you can hand over to your network operations and your data center folks and say, I need to provision this kind of hardware to go through these things, and here's my security plan.
You're just sort of, fluid forwards. There's no gates, there's no review points as much, it's continuous.
Correct. It is a continuous change, deployment, everything that has to happen there. So we have to come up with a new way to operate, right? And I would love to say we figured everything out. We have not. We are constantly reevaluating the best ways to operate, both with our security partners, our global cybersecurity group, as well as our SOC, getting the alerts and understanding who's responsible for what. It's interesting. I think the tools that we can introduce from the sort of market delivery perspective to help the really literally the shift left mentality of developers do more have immensely helped to help kind of like shove down those sorts of catching things essentially before they even get off of even developer's machine, right? To be able to understand what kind of library and choices that we use from an architecture perspective. But we're also continuously looking at the best kinds of architecture patterns and practices for deployment as well, right? And how we actually work with our partners.
So this is, it's sort of a fascinating transition, right? And you're describing, the change of really everything, really, about how do you operate, and I think you rightly describe this as changing how we operate. If we sort of focus on security, for a moment, you're inside, your title is director of engineering, right? The title isn't security title, and you're describing security activity, and you're talking about sort of shifting left and building those security components in. How, from an organizational perspective, how has security changed, from within the company? Is there sort of a separate security team that's a part of this digital transformation? This like digital Liberty Mutual? Is it the security team that's sort of learning how do they kind of adapt to this new surroundings, security responsibility and edge? Instead of trying to enumerate the options, how is that being handled in that context of all this big change?
It is a brave new world in terms of how we're doing this, right? And so a lot of the drive begins with, what is it that we're really doing to the customer, right? And as we keep pushing that, we've had to evolve and understand and have certain people assume certain roles, right? So we have the concept of, we call them solution engineers, or they're more or less like a solution architect, same idea. And a lot of those folks essentially have taken some of the leads from a market and digital delivery perspective, understanding the kinds of risks that we're going to be throwing out there based on what it is that we're making, and whether that be writing shiny new web clients or chatbots or the text SMS interaction, along with our new web apps, and then helping to work on new plans that essentially didn't exist in this continuous deployment model, right? To be able to put together the kinds of checks we need. So, for example, if we have like Sneak as part of our CI/CD pipelines, that now has become our responsibility, because previously we would have thrown this in a monthly release cycle, right? And it would have gone through
someone would audit.
Somebody would have checked all this stuff and checked all the boxes and said, are you doing all these things, yes or no? When we said we're not doing this anymore, we're going to deploy at will and at demand, we had to come up with our own methodologies to be able to incorporate back into this. So we are taking the lead on this, right?
And was that sort of a conscious decision? So like there was sort of this set of, hey, from a compliance perspective, or just sort of, the security policy, here are the things that need to go into a release or whatever sort of, code that got shipped into production, code that touches our kind of the private and sort of personal data that you touch. How will you be satisfying it? Or has it been more sort of the dev team being security minded because it's a different perspective, a different breed?
There's the aspect of we chose to go with an open source ecosystem, right? A very popular one too, right? So you talk about full stack JavaScript. So we're sort of on the hook for understanding the kinds of vulnerabilities we're continuously bringing in or potentially bringing in as part of that. There's another aspect where we're trying to figure this out now too. Like I said, terms of moving into the cloud. You get into sort of a dynamic security aspect. That's been a joint effort between sort of a centralized security group as well as partners that we have that might be maintaining, say, like a WAF or application firewall, rule sets and scanning that go along with that, as well as bending those rules and modifying them to meet our needs.
These are groups that are, these partners are the same teams that would have secured the sort of pre-digital transformation teams, or are these new teams that got formed for this purpose, or new individuals that kind of got tasked with the...
They are the same teams that existed, but they've evolved, right? And so they have become a newer set of entity under sort of this global cybersecurity group that exists within our world. And their role is essentially to still take on this sort of centralized security response, an incident management aspect.
Right.
Where we've had to come together is a newer understanding of the architecture that we're proposing, that we're doing. You talk about things like moving into cloud and serverless. You talk about getting rid of giant monolithic applications that are much easier to manage from a security perspective because it's one spot and everything's there. And as we move into a service-oriented architecture, you could call it microservices, you call it whatever you want, but essentially as we move into the service-oriented architecture in the cloud, we are redrawing out the ways in which we're interoperating. And what we found is super interesting is that there isn't really one side or the other side. There's a lot of shades of gray that go in between both of these sides, right? And there's sort of granular and fine-grained abilities that some of us want to have and not. From a security and centralized security group perspective, they want to know if there's a potential incident or there's a potential problem or if there's a very broad-scale vulnerability and be alerted to it and understand that somebody's going to be looking at remediate it, or whether they're going to be involved, or whether they're going to have to get us involved, everything like that. But there's a lot of fine-grained detail that goes into what we're implementing all day long, and we bluntly speaking, we outnumber them. This is we have several hundred developers in the digital group alone, and over 1,000 developers inside the U.S. alone. The security organization that's centralized doesn't have that many folks, right? It's a much smaller ratio. I don't know if it's quite 100 to 1, but it might be, right, in terms of that size. So how do you operate in this, knowing that the developers are essentially now pushing and changing everything, right, as a growing force and have the capabilities to do this too? And where do you draw the line? So we've worked to a new model where there's a little bit of the central group and essentially what their needs are, and then there's sort of a group that's evolving under the market level, digital level, like say under me, where we have security champions and we have dedicated folks that are involved in part analysis, part plan, part architecture. It's a little bit of blur, but essentially it'll boil down to procedural, DevOps, automation things, anything that we'd be doing to essentially carry out those checklists. And I think it's just going to keep growing as we keep evolving.
So this would be to echo this back, within the digital group, there will be, or maybe there are DevOps entities, so there's somebody there that is sort of more central, but not security dedicated, that focuses on sort of developer empowerment. There's the central security entity that, reasonably has the same concerns regardless of whether it's on, new or old infrastructure. If it's a vulnerability, it needs to be handled. But then, for this new world, this sort of DevOps team needs to take on, or is taking on some more of this responsibility in coordination with the security team. Did I sort of hear that correctly?
Yeah, that's about right. Yep. It's a little bit more split up than that, and I don't need to get into the details of our organization that likes to shift around as things do. But there's definitely needs from, like I said, from that first response perspective, from a global, is this going to be a problem from a customer perspective that we need to really be concerned about, essentially, rolling up to our CISO, versus the roles that we have to help enable the functionality that we're driving and we're pushing, right? So it is a little bit of a self-elected, self-nominated, we have to do this. We don't have a choice, so as we keep expanding this channel.
Well, you made a decision to sort of, embrace the technical platforms, or you made the technology choices, and given the fact they're different than past technology choices, you have to assume some responsibilities.
It's like, when we have that freedom, we have to pay that price a little bit, right?
Exactly. It goes hand in hand. So, you're doing, I think this process you describe is fascinating, and it's probably like similar to many other sort of digital transformation initiatives What would you say are a couple of your key learnings here? Things that if you look back at the last year or two, you would have done differently, or, after 7 iterations, you kind of hit the right mark. What tips do you have to somebody else going through this same journey to spare them a mistake or two?
One of the things we had to figure out was how to get the developers to care about this, right? So we didn't have dedicated security folks. We have some people that care about it more than others, but we had started a sort of a guild concept internally, right? And so it kind of went how you would imagine it went, right? There's a lot of people that I really like UIs, right? And there's a lot of people that I like some services and I like back-end stuff. Then we had, let's do a testing guild, a security guild. There was, a few people there.
Yeah.
That's typically how it goes, right? And those are two areas that I care about because they're super important and usually underrepresented, right? Essentially, not misrepresented.
A little bit more invisible.
Yeah, a little bit more subdued in terms of their role. The tricky part was trying to figure out how to get them to really understand just as much as they might be concerned with the way their code is presented, the kinds of libraries they're making, incessantly caring about nitty-gritty things like linting rules and code and everything like that. Can you get them to care about security just as easily? And one of the things was looking at the kinds of tools that we could use that were super easy to integrate into their everyday processes, so API-driven. The second thing was using tools that were also easy to read and understand what they meant, right? So that meant if there was something that was scanning or something that was helping them with the security process, there wasn't a lot of noise, right? Yep. They weren't just sitting there saying, oh, that's great. This tool just told me I have 2,000 things wrong with my stuff. I don't care about this anymore.
Right? A much better sort of signal to noise ratio, yeah.
Correct, right? So we had looked across and then, we looked at different tooling to do that. We also had tried to incorporate a lot of these tools into DevOps pipelines automatically. We're using a sort of a split mode between, like say, Jenkins and some other Atlassian tools, Bamboo, and some other tools that exist inside there. And we're trying to coalesce around some, but how do we then make that so that they're not really thinking about it so much, right? It's super easy for them to say, okay, this is a quick change. I understand this. The second part was also getting our product owners to buy in, that this was super important too. A lot of them are focused on making great changes for the customers, right? They have certain metrics they want to get to with customer satisfaction, making sure that folks like this. We had to angle that in, and we're continuously doing that in to say, hey, also a secure website is super important for your customers, right? To have them have that peace of mind, to make sure that it seems like we know what we're doing, right? And that they're capable of providing that safer environments, with any kind of incident or stuff like that too. So we had to really step back and focus a lot on that. And quite frankly, a lot of what we're going to be doing the rest of this year and into next year is a heavy focus and working with our product owners, in addition to our security organization, on educating what it is that we're trying to do, what is it that where we want to go, and understanding the kinds of roles that everyone needs to play in helping support this kind of transition, because it's kind of an everybody thing. To your point, we don't really have a dedicated person. Like we don't really even have dedicated QA or testing folks anymore. Right? It's something that we're shying away from, and we're saying this is everybody's responsibility as part of the dev thing. You're responsible for DevOps. You're responsible for testing QA as it goes. You're responsible for security as it goes, and trying to kind of spread that all out with certain champions to help push certain things.
Right, across those, yeah. But, I think probably what I like the most about what you're describing is how you're basically treating security the same way you are treating all the other aspects. So, well, there's a UI guild, there's also a security guild, or sort of a testing guild, even talking about product, getting into the backlog. I think what you're describing is actually sort of the epitome of making security just a natural aspect of quality, of just, well, this is what good software looks like. It has those components in, which I assume is not an easy challenge, but feels like once accomplished is just sort of more ingrained into the fabric of how software is developed in the new stack, right?
You said it correctly, right? All of this is a software quality play, right? Not for a means to an end, not just because we want to sit here and chew on building correct software. What's the old adage? There's always the old joke that it's a bunch of DevOpsy folks that just love to tool around and get their most perfect Kubernetes cluster sitting there and running in perfect harmony, right? it's not what we're trying to do. I mean, we're trying to do what I believe, and I think what a lot of the folks in the industry are thinking, just as in the DevOps idea. If you want to take this to DevSecOps, right? This is where this is going. This is part of your job.
Yep.
It's part of your everyday. There's a lot of noise and choices that certain individuals say, like from a leadership perspective, like from my angle, as well as in harmony with a security organization, can help filter out and say, okay, well, like there's some basics that you have to cover, and there's some things that we're sort of expecting out of this. But other than that, just keep building towards these sort of things. We're starting to introduce the idea of essentially KPI, or better yet, more like OKR-driven requirements for security as well as performance and testing.
Oh, that's fascinating. What are the OKRs? Sorry for interrupting you there for a second, but like, what are sample of OKRs that you had around security initiatives? Just the metrics, not necessarily the thresholds.
Yeah, they're a little bit of both. It depends, right? So a lot of them would be tangible upon potential outcomes that we're looking for, right? So I believe I heard earlier today in a discussion the idea of like rewarding teams that might have sort of a zero vulnerability in certain aspects, stuff like that too. It's kind of being driven that way. It's the idea that in building these continuously evolving new software choices, we're going to be rewarding folks just as we're meeting sort of OKRs for getting certain other percentage to the website or certain other stuff like that. Yeah. It's if we can hit these some degree of thresholds or some degree of code security quality, like some sort of maintenance level, like we didn't introduce the new vulnerabilities. We made conscious choices to not use certain libraries, right? And that helped a whole bunch of different things by not doing that. We're now baking that into plans as we're thinking into next year and giving those same OKRs to our product owners alongside with the customer-centric ones, right? So that it's all kind of equalized.
Rationalizing the same, sort of sits there right next to sort of the business value metrics, because this is business value. It's just you have to measure it in some, as a leading indicator, right? And I guess that's in general one of my sort of areas of passion is just sort of exploring, hence my butting in there on those is just sort of finding security metrics. And it sounds like in this case you're saying, well, I'm sort of picking more of the accomplishment of the activity that I'm doing. I'm not trying to sort of get into some nebulous like how secure am I type measurement. It's more about, well, I've set out to not have known vulnerabilities in my system. Have I achieved that or not?
We want to set guidelines towards the excellence levels we want to achieve as an organization, and that's security, and that's a level of testing that we have, and that's site performance, which is super huge, and that completely and very directly impacts our customers. All of those get intertwined, but we don't want to necessarily be super overly prescriptive on how. We do want to narrow down into some guidelines. So there's like a middle ground that we're trying to come to where we can put a little bit of blinders on and say it's not completely open field. You can't just do whatever you want and use 50,000 different security tools or testing tools or even web frameworks for that matter, right? We're going to centralize around this more or less, and we're going to kind of go over here. I like to point out too, if there's any developers that are listening to this, sort of like the Airbnb model. They have certain standards that they use and certain libraries that they do. I don't know anybody at Airbnb, but I have to imagine that internally there are plenty of other teams that explore other avenues and ways to do it. It's not like everybody uses this universally, right? And it changes over time. That's the model we're taking. It's like, let's pick like an 80-90% kind of common denominator about where to go. Say, go that way, right? And kind of go do this. And then say, figure it out, right? And we know we have a bunch of smart developers, really great engineers, and they're constantly coming up with awesome stuff. We're just trying to make sure that they're measured and incentivized for doing the kinds of security practices in the same ways as they are for that very direct customer-centric type of idea. Like I made something visually appealing. I made a workflow that worked really awesome. I added this functionality that never existed before that talked to some of our systems and made the customer's life that much easier. This should be alongside with all that stuff.
Right. Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. And I think I find it to be, very much future looking, basically just sort of try to understand around the destination. You talk about outcomes of the different aspects of software, outcome of, am I performant, am I secure? But to an extent, if you think about these things as the outcomes of the organization, if you manage to achieve an organization that measures itself this way, I think that's a good destination. There's a whole bunch of other things we can sort of dig into over here, but I think we're sort of coming a little bit to the end of the time. Before I let you go, I like to ask every kind of guest coming on the show if you have one sort of piece of advice, one tip or maybe like a pet peeve, something people should stop doing, or one tip of something to start doing to level up their security foo. what would that one bit of advice be?
There's a lot of change going on in the industry right now, right? In the security industry, right? Like I said before, there's a lot of players in the market. There's a lot of tools. I think, to be fair, there's also almost a lot of noise just in the market itself. I think as a developer, it's a little confusing. My advice would be to educate yourself on the basics. And there's plenty of resources. You can go around to almost any. You can go to Sneak's website. You can go to White Source's website, Contrast's website. Everybody has a blog, right? Yep. Everybody's got a blog. And they all do a very good job of trying to describe and understand the kinds of ways that security is handled and ways to segment it. It doesn't take a lot of your time to understand the differences between source code analysis and static application test security, dynamic. I found a new acronym when I was looking this up the other day. It wasn't DAST, it was MAST, which somebody referred to as manual application security testing. And I was like, that's
pen testing.
Yeah, that's free. Yeah. That's about right? But understanding that most of that world, especially from a developer standpoint, is very accessible to them, right? Like the SAST, the SCA, the IAST, even the RASP worlds are very much within their reach. DAST is a little bit different story. I think you're still going to need a bunch of interesting security professionals coming up with ways in which you can kind of hack into
successful as can.
Yeah, everybody's sites and constantly be churning that out. I think I heard you say recently, I mean, there's not going to be any shortage of jobs for security professionals anytime ever, right? It's
the sad reality of
and it's only, I'm sure there's only going to be more job opportunities in the near future as everything moves more online and we do more things via our phones and our computers and our watches. For all I know, we're anticipating that's going to be a thing probably in the next couple of years. When I worked in IoT, I never believed that voice stuff would be real 5 years ago, and now I have an Alexa in almost every room in my house, so I get it. I think it's just super easy to educate yourself on this stuff, and I think most developers just don't necessarily think it's their job, right? Whereas I think many of them now are in the mode of, I do testing, I do ops, I understand my environment, I get into the cloud. I think there's a next evolution that comes to security as part of that, and that kind of rounds out a lot of most of what's going to become a very developer-centric new way of working over the next decade or two. And you're only going to see more developers keep popping up.
Yeah, right? That would be a good skill and a good talent to have. So sound advice. Brian, thanks a lot for coming on the show and sharing all this info. And thanks everybody for tuning in, and I hope you join us for the next one.
That's all we have time for today. If you'd like to come on as a guest on this show or get involved in this community, find us at thesecuredeveloper.com or on Twitter @thesecuredev. Visit heavybit.com to find additional episodes, full transcriptions, and other great podcasts. See you next time.